In 1940, with the world at war, M.C. Escher hit a warning inside this chess position. Civilizations don't collapse on the battlefield. They fall when a loaf of bread costs a day's wages. Famous for unresolvable paradoxes and enigmas in his work, Dutch artist Maurits Cornelis Escher doesn't just invite you to think, he forces it upon you. Heavily influenced by science and mathematics, his work includes references to Mobius strips and complex three-dimensional shapes. He even made a famous print called Relativity. When he moved to the town of Château d'Ay in Switzerland with his family to escape Italian fascism, he joined the chess club and even helped them advertise. The greatest expression of Escher's fascination with the game can be found within Metamorphosis II. The second of a three-part series, it's a sprawling woodcut print that is almost 4 meters long. The tableau shows an evolution of increasingly complex geometric shapes. It begins with the cross patterns of the Dutch word for metamorphosis that transitions into a chessboard pattern. The squares become more complex creatures who become lizards, who then morph into the hexagons of a beehive from which emerge a colony of bees. The insects become fish who turn into birds that shift into tessellated cubes. These cubes then transform into the town of Atrani on the Amalfi Coast in Italy, which Escher visited numerous times and was captivated by. From the seaside depiction of Atrani, we see a tower that becomes a rook on the chessboard, still making a ripple in the water at its base. The cooperation shown by the bees culminated in the construction of complex cities. However, we now see this civilization at war in the form of a chess game, a classic metaphor for armed conflict. Escher began work on this piece in November 1939, a mere 2 months after Hitler's invasion of Poland, which triggered World War II. It's fair to say that the descent of civilization into total war was on his mind. Although Escher began the work at the outbreak of the deadliest conflict in human history, the particular chess position in the piece gives a fascinating insight into how he imagined it might end. He chose to depict the final force sequence of the Smothered mate. Each side has 2 pawns. Black has its queen, a bishop, and a knight, while white has both rooks and a queen, a huge material advantage. But black just sacrificed its queen, leaving white with only 1 legal move. The rook must capture because black's queen is guarded by the bishop. And then the black knight jumps in. The king is under attack with no escape squares, smothered by his own pieces. The link between the 4 horsemen of a chess set and the 4 horsemen of the Apocalypse may not have been lost on M.C. Escher. Having made hundreds of woodcuts and engravings, he was certainly aware of the German master Albrecht Dürer and his famous depiction of the subject. Of all the forced mates he could have shown, he picked one where it's the black knight who delivers checkmate. As an artist with a painstaking commitment to detail, it's not at all likely he would leave the crucial scene in his tableau to chance. So to choose a position where the black horse seals white's destruction strongly echoes the description of famine, the 3rd horseman of the Apocalypse in the book of Revelation, chapter 6, verses 5 and 6. When the Lamb opened the 3rd seal, I heard the living creature say, "Come and see." So I looked, and behold, a black horse. And he who sat on it had a pair of scales in his hand. And I heard a voice in the midst of the 4 living creatures saying, "A quart of wheat for a denarius, and 3 quarts of barley for a denarius, and do not harm the oil and the wine." The disembodied voice mentions a denarius, which was a day's wage for a common laborer, and a quart of wheat was 1 day's food for an adult. So the voice describes a man who works from morning to night and earns exactly enough to feed himself and no one else. His family eats only if they switch to barley, the coarse grain usually reserved for animals. According to biblical scholar Robert Mounce, the prices of barley and wheat in this passage were 10 to 12 times what they usually cost at the time when John of Patmos wrote the book of Revelation. The famine that the black writer brings is not caused by a natural disaster, but inflation. The writer holds the scales, typically associated with justice, but in this case, they're used to charge an exorbitant price for basic essentials. The White King suffers from the same affliction. He is surrounded by resources, yet he is starving for lack of space. In the second to last section of the tableau, the board empties. Perhaps this sudden shift foreshadows the coming of death embodied by the fourth horseman, who rides a pale horse. Finally, Escher returns to the very first section, and the cycle is ready to start again. Having lived through the First World War, and now witnessing the world once again descend into madness, Escher warns us of how our society will collapse. The final blow won't come from battle. It will announce itself on a receipt.